Hello, friends. I think we are now live, unless I messed something up again. So this is our language and runtime community stand-up. Today with me, we have a few people. So I introduce myself again, and then the other people can go. So I'm Emil Landworth. I'm a PM on the platform team.
I'm Kathleen Ballard. I'm a PM on the .NET team, doing several different things with languages and with the SDK and CLI.
I'm Philip Carter. I'm also PM on the .NET team, doing several things with languages and tooling in Visual Studio.
But you all do something with runtime or languages. That's interesting. It's almost like this is the right group of people to do this.
It's almost like we have the right group of people here. It's almost like that.
That's cool. So yeah, so today we have a few things. Hopefully we close early. Famous last words, but you guys have another meeting, so that should be easy for us. So I think Philip wants to go first, right? He had a cool demo.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know about cool. But yeah, so pretty much the main thing from the F# language side of things is that we are now done with F# 5 from a feature standpoint. I think I wrote a blog post a little while ago saying that there would be one more tweak. That tweak has basically been implemented for one of the features that we're shipping. And so now the team's focus up until the .NET 5 release is going to just be bug fixes and incorporating, some feedback that we get from some of the features that we finished over the next, I think, month and a half, 2 months or so now. And then we'll be in like hard lockdown, probably taking things like very severe bug fixes until the .NET 5 release, which is also going to be the F# 5 release. So it's an interesting time because it's both like stress relieving and stressful at the same time. Like it's stress relieving in that we're finally done with feature development, which is utterly exhausting. But it's also stressful in the sense that it's like, oh gosh, okay, we only have like a short amount of time to make sure that like any possible bugs and regressions that we may have like not quite accounted for get fixed before it goes out. But I'm sure it'll be a good release because we've been getting a lot of people using the previews of these features for a long time and fixing things along the way. So speaking of that, last time I demoed interpolated strings. I won't be demoing that again because that's it's already there. One thing I did make mention of is that we had a feature called open type declarations. And that was going in there, but I did not have a demo. And that was because the bits were not inside of the internal build of Visual Studio that I was using to demo things off of. So the only thing I could have shown was a editor full of compile errors. And so I wasn't going to bother doing that. So instead, now that everything is all hooked up, I'm going to actually do stuff. So let me share my screen here. Should have Visual Studio. Everybody should be able to see this without any issue. Okay. So this is just an F# script using I think this is 16.8 preview 4. So that's what the internal build is. So whenever a preview 4 comes out, this is basically exactly what it would look like. So open type declarations. What is that? Well, if you're from C# land, you've probably heard of using static. That's basically what this is, except we think ours is named a little bit better because it is about finally opening up a type to expose stuff inside of it. So one of the classic ones is open type system.math, right? And so you can type pi, you can type, I get max. I don't have to go math.max, ceiling, if I can spell correctly. There we go. Things like that, right? So this is whenever there's a static class that contains static methods on it, this is sort of like one of the primary use cases for that sort of thing. You can also do this on your own. So I can go my static class in F#, and I can go static member mo equals mo Landbeth. Let me spell your name correctly there, right? And a static class is actually just a class that is both abstract and sealed. That's actually literally what it is under the covers. If you compile a static class down in C# down into IL, it is a class that is abstract and sealed. So I can go open type my static class, and I can unqualified access mo. I don't need to say my static class.mo. This is a tool that's probably going to be used more by, or rather the ability to expose static stuff is probably going to be used more by library authors than anything else. But there is a rather interesting addition that we did to this that is fairly unique for F#. So consider a module that I've called my module. And I have a function thing, right? Just a unit returning function does nothing. Let other function x is x times x, whatever. That's like square. But like, say I have a whole bunch of these functions here. Say I have like 20 or 30 of them. What I can normally do is I can go open my module, and I can open up this module and expose everything that's in there, right? Let's say I have a type in here, my union, and there's an A, there's a B, and there's a C. What if I want to access my union, but I don't want to access anything else in here? Well, there's an easy way to do that today. My module dot A, B, C, like that kind of stuff. But what if I don't want to do that though? What if I want unqualified access to a type, but I don't want to access anything inside here? Well, there's no way to actually accomplish that in F# today until F#5. Now I can go open type my module dot my union. And now I can get unqualified access to these union cases. So this is kind of like a minor thing, really, but the way that we sort of look at it is like from a language design, like orthogonality standpoint, we think that it makes sense. This is probably not going to be something that everybody does all the time, but it's just kind of like a little nice thing to sort of, in those cases where you have a bunch of code and you want to expose one thing, but you don't want to expose everything else. You used to not have the tools to do that, and now you actually have a tool to do that. And so this will work not only for union types, but this will also give unqualified access to records as well. Nested classes. You can actually even do interesting things like open type system.collections.generic of list of int, and it will actually open up a like stuff the list of int, and then I mean this isn't actually a good example because there isn't anything useful in there, but it will basically make it so that the generic type that you're working with, unqualified from that point, is an int. You can actually also do this in C#, which is interesting. Most people probably don't know that you can use a static class and parameterize it with a generic type. But so, yeah, this is sort of the last feature that's now shipping in F#5, along with, I believe it's 11 other features that we shipped. I'm not going to go over all of them right now, but I will be writing a blog post probably with the .NET 5 RC alongside, like whenever .NET 5 RC comes out, it's going to be like F#5 RC as well. And so I'll have a blog post that just basically it's going to go through every single feature that we shipped and just sort of combine all the different things that we've done in previous blog posts. Just have like a giant mega blog post, and then probably do that again for the release as well. And that's what I got.
Cool.
Awesome stuff.
All right. We didn't get questions coming in, so if anybody's got any questions on that, you should jump in. We have a new UI where the questions come in much easier for us. It's really great. You on .NET Rocks, huh?
Yeah, I was. It was okay. So that was actually pretty fun.
Was it your first time?
You see this water bottle?
Uh-huh.
Well, actually, I got I don't know if you can I have a new mic.
Yeah, don't whisper in the mic. It's super creepy when you show us that.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to speak into it all creepy. But I didn't have this for the .NET Rock show. And so I just had like this webcam from the office that was kind of not very good and kind of just had like the built-in microphone that sucked. And so I was on the thing with Carl Franklin, and I was speaking to him, and then he's like, wait, Philip, hold up. I'm going to be straight with you. You sound like crap, dude. And I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, this is like, do you have anything else? Because this is going to sound really, really bad on the podcast. I'm like, oh no. And we tried like my laptop, and it was the same problem. And I sounded like, I think he said that I sounded like I was inside of a bathroom made out of metal. Like that's how awful it sounded. And so we figured out that I could turn the levels through Windows on that thing way, way down, and then put the webcam on the rim of this water bottle, and then point it up at my face with the webcam turned off, so that it acted as a microphone. And so like the podcast went smoothly and the sound was okay. But after that happened, I'm like, okay, I should probably just get a microphone, because this is kind of...
It is. I've been on with you, and so that was a good call. That was a really good call to do that. And I'm so impressed. Let me guess. It was Richard that figured, no, I bet it was Carl that figured out that was a trick that you could do.
Well, it was a collaborative effort. So what Carl figured out the trick, and then he said I needed to find a way to get it close to my mouth, and I didn't feel like holding it. So then I saw a water bottle, and I'm like, oh, I could just put it on the rim of the water bottle. And yeah, it worked out okay.
Awesome. Great. Okay. Yeah, that's awesome.
So you MacGyvered the podcast. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah, so we did get a question which I can answer pretty clearly, which is which version of VS is going to contain .NET 5 RTM support? And that will be update 8. And so yes, update 8 comes out in November, and November is our timeline for all future .NET releases forever. Well, forever is not forever, right? As far as we can tell, we've got this commitment now to this schedule, and we'll be aligning with one of the updates in Visual Studio. It is updating. So the current previews is where you find .NET 5 on its way to RTM. Yeah. So let's see. Oh yeah, AV equipment for remote work. Yeah, and I'm on a crap camera that doesn't zoom, and so you get to see my whole living room, which is unfortunate. But I have I could get one, but it's not the one I want. And so it's been hard for me to do that. And believe it or not, I've been on all sorts of places, including .NET Rocks, and my Surface Pro mic is what I'm using, and it is kicking ass. It's kicking. The mic on the camera doesn't work very well, but the mic on my Surface does just fine. And I get in touch with Richard ahead of time. I'm like, "Oh, is this going to be okay?" And he goes, "Yeah, you sound fine, Kathleen." So eventually I get another mic, but it's not high on the list. Anyway, so shall we go on? Any support GUI and .NET Core for Linux? We have no plans right now. We would love to do that. We'd all get excited, but yeah, not yet. I hope it's someplace down the road for all of us. We all would like to see that. Yeah. All right. Okay. So, hey, can we talk about VB?
Of course.
All right. So VB is like in this opposite mode than it's in an opposite mode than I got the wrong person big. Let's see if I can. I'm going to remove myself.
No, you basically what you want is you want this probably.
Oh, no. Okay. So we'll just go back to that. Okay, there we go. Okay, let's just go to the code and not worry about trying to talk without the code for a second. So our goal for VB for the .NET 5 timeframe is to get WinForms working well. Now that sounds like it's just going to be it doesn't sound like as big a deal as it is, but we did a lot of things to WinForms in .NET Core that were different than .NET Framework, and one of the big ones was that the designer itself is now out of proc, and for VB that made a difference because we have to talk to the editor to set up the handles clause. So when you set up to handle get the behavior for an event, then that is in the code in a different way than it is in C#. Basically, in C# you look one place, and in VB you look anywhere, and that was actually really hard to do. And so I realized that this is going to be not like it's a demo that's really important for me to share, but I know that it maybe doesn't quite have the flash of some other demos. I am going to click this button. Okay, click the button, and we're going to go to code, and we're going to go to a previously exist. That's a form load. It did not go to the button. It should have gone to the button. Hang on a second. We'll get that. Let's go back over here. And I know I clicked on the wrong thing, so let's just try this again. I clicked on the button, let's click on the button, and I'm going to form load. I got to check on that. But we did not create, the problem previously is we created a new one every time we double clicked on it. And so regardless of whether you had one, I don't know why it's going to form 1 instead of going to button 1. This is last night's bits, quite literally. I picked them up this morning, loaded them on my machine. This is very new stuff to get that fixed. The other thing we've been working on is VB has a special way of doing things. And if you're a VB programmer, you probably don't even know how that works behind the scenes. So let me just explain a couple of things that we do here. So one of which is if you say show off files, the My Project node expands into having more interesting things. And the high DPI is just a temporary thing in the nightly build. But behind this, there's a file called My App. And My App is what defines the features that you have available, which if you're a VB programmer, via the VB WinForms project properties. So you come into project properties and you set various things. And so we're also super excited that this is now enabled, and that if you come down here and click Make Single Instance, that seems like a good thing to click. And then we just go back to My App, then single instance is now true. And if we go back and we say, wait, I didn't really want single instance. I wanted that to be false. And then we go back and it's now false right here. So that's super exciting for us. There was a lot of work done to get that. The VB demos are a little bit of an anticlimactic because for us, what we're trying to do is make these things that are special to VB that have not worked in .NET Core work in .NET Core. So it's these kinds of things that are kind of a smush into Visual Studio that we've been working on. And the other thing is, yes, I just did show true and false on single instance. I'm not actually going to run a single instance app, but we do expect that Visual Basic on .NET Core will have single instance. If you want it for C#, you should definitely ask for it. And a single instance app means, if you don't know, that when the application starts up, it looks for previously existing instance of the same application. And if it finds one, it says, wait, you can't start another one, and passes whatever you had as command line, whatever you were passing into the instance you were trying to start, that goes into a special event on the instance that's already running. And so that allows you to behave in the same general way that an old MDI app would have done back in the day when Word would be one application that would just open new pages. That it's that kind of behavior, which now you may not be doing an MDI app, but you may be using that feature to keep perhaps a service from being started more than once, or some other reason that you want to have only a single instance running. So we're working on that, and some of the stuff, we definitely still have work to do. I'm definitely a little nervous, but we're working on getting VB. There's an awful lot of things do work today. We definitely still have some bugs, and so we'll be working on those, and that's kind of the status of VB. And yes, I do care about VB. Somebody says thank you for caring about VB. Yes, I do care about VB. I care about a lot of things, and you all that use our tools, you care about VB, you care about other things too, and that's why I also personally like VB. But it's the folks out there, and we think the best thing for folks out there is to take VB into .NET Core, let you move your applications, and just take a break from any changes in the language, so that your .NET Framework application and your .NET Core application will always look the same. Somebody's not going to make a change in .NET Framework in a library that causes that not to work right in .NET Framework. Keeping them the same for right now as people are transitioning, we think is the right thing for Visual Basic folks. And we get some heat every once in a while for that, but we have absolutely not deprecated Visual Basic. And the fact that we're slowing the language down right now is caused some confusion on that. And so I just want to say every chance I get, no, we have not deprecated VB. We're investing in it. We're making these investments. We're making investments. Every time you get a new version of Visual Studio, you may not even notice it, but you've got more features. It just works better. And that most new features, most new code fixes and analyzers, most of that is created for both Visual Basic and C#, just as a matter of how Microsoft does things. And so, that's where we sit right now with Visual Basic. And I just want to check and see if anybody else has anything on VB before we see what else we want to talk about today. So that's it from the VB front. I told you, it's just like we're just trying to get back to where we were. So it doesn't make for a super exciting demo, but we're really excited to be able to show it, and really excited that we're going to be there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what's great about this is this is the sort of stuff that, like, I mean, part of what has made .NET Core difficult over the past couple of years has been things that people just sort of expected to be there and work like really well the way that it did just on .NET Core. That's been coming along incrementally, and this is just a great example of that, where people can move to .NET Core and at least for the most part have stuff work the way that they would expect it to. Yeah,
there's some things that are still going to be challenging for people. So, for example, you still have to worry about the project file transition. So I'll show you a Visual Basic project file. We can now just double click to see it, and let's see. There we go. Now, folks that are used to C# are going to think this is a little noisy, and part of the answer is yes. Right now, we're a little noisy, but there's a few things you can see here. One of which is we've changed the way TFM works. Emo can follow up on that. So instead of having, if you're used to 3.1 WinForms, there was an SDK that included WinForms for many reasons, including to better support multi-targeting. We've moved that into the TFM. The root namespace is a specific VB thing. Some other things here are specific VB. We'll probably move the property group into editor config. We just haven't done that work yet. The my type, that's what drives the magic in Visual Basic. And we think right now we're going to leave imports in the project file because we think Visual Basic programmers may want to come in and change that, and that actually having that visible is probably the right thing to do for Visual Basic, rather than tucking it away in the SDK, in which case you'd have to exclude one you didn't want. So if you didn't want system.drawing, you'd have to do an exclude. And so we think that's a little bit backwards feeling. So we think we're probably going to do that, and then we're going to try to clean up the rest of this stuff. So there is going to be, probably in 16.8, there'll be a little bit of messiness in this and a few other places, and then we'll tidy things up for 16.9. So that's, it's the track that we're on, but yeah. But we are trying to make it as easy as possible to move. That is the goal. That is absolutely the goal. So Emma, do you want to talk about Target Framework?
.NET Framework? Yeah, well, there's not much to say about .NET Framework, right? I think you want to talk
target
about
loader, please.
target framework.
Yeah, so what you see there on screen is basically our new target frameworks are like we used to have just net 1, net 2, net 3, net 4, and now we actually have net 5, which is the successor of .NET Core / .NET Standard. And in order for us to reason about like different operating system support, so for example, if you target net 5, we assume you want to run everywhere where .NET runs now. But if you want to access Windows APIs like WinForms or WPF, which this app is, it's a WinForms app, then you basically say -Windows, which basically gives you access to to all the Windows specific APIs. And what's cool with that is that it's basically very easy for you to understand how compatibility works. So we don't have disjoint TFMs. Now we have just TFMs with suffixes, if you will. So we will have in the .NET 6 timeframe, we'll also support iOS and Android. And so then you will have net 6, net 6-Windows, net 6-iOS, net 6-Android. And then it's relatively obvious who is compatible with whom by the sheer notion that everybody who shares the same version number or has a lower version number is compatible with the higher version number, right? So it's much easier to understand that than it was with .NET Standard, because you had to understand that .NET Core App 3 supports .NET Standard 2.1, but these things are not necessarily obvious, right? But with this scheme, it's pretty obvious who's compatible with whom. And that's basically the way we expose operating system specific APIs moving forward. So there was one question in chat that I'm not entirely sure I understand what the question is, and that I think I clicked on it earlier by accident, but let me actually scroll back now. Jerome was asking, how has being able to support new platforms with .NET evolved over the years? For example, we're now adding Apple Silicon support for the runtime. So I'm not entirely sure what the question is, but I guess fundamentally, like, yes, we do add new platforms. I mean, we just did a lot of investment in ARM, for example. So you can actually find this on our blog. We regularly blog about it. I think Rich did a blog post about our ARM support that we just did. We did a bunch of intrinsic support over the last year and a half, where we basically added APIs that allow you to access CPU-specific instructions for all the different architectures that we support. And yes, .NET has always supported multiple architectures. I mean, even in the .NET Framework days, there's x86, there's x64, for example. And I think in the good old days, you may have even supported architectures that we then dropped at some point because nobody cared about them anymore. I remember, for example, Windows NT had like weird alpha support and stuff going on. So that's not really new. I mean, it is a little bit easier with an open source project, but I mean, not much has changed in that world. Yeah, so like the one thing I want to quickly talk about, let me actually try to share my screen.
Yep.
Let me try this. Hey, it worked like a charm. So there's a new blog post that you may want to read. It's not that new. It's like now at this point 10 days old almost. So it is about a new primitive data type. So you probably are now float and double, or single and double, depending on which naming convention you're using. And so a new type called half, which is basically a 16-bit floating point number. And it's unlike the other numbers, it doesn't have full support by the language, because it's mostly data type that is used for data exchange, meaning if you want to call lower level APIs, or you want to store floating point numbers with less precision to save space, that's kind of what this type is for. So it's another example of something that is relatively new in the .NET Core world, where we actually now add support for more advanced types. And similar to intrinsics, it's an area where we actively push the envelope and try to make more advanced scenarios easier with .NET. Another thing I wanted to quickly talk about is John wrote a blog post also about 10 years ago where we added a bunch of analyzers. So you may have heard of Rosen analyzers. What we haven't done so far is we have not shipped any analyzers in the box. So they were all NuGet packages that you had to hunt down and install. And so one of the big changes with .NET 5 is that we added support for a ton of analyzers in the box, which now means if you do, file a new project and you create a .NET 5 app by default, these analyzers are enabled. There's this new concept called analysis level, which is basically our way to say, well, regardless of the target framework, you may want to get access to more advanced code analysis. And so you can just bump the analysis level to a higher value, and then you basically get access to those things without upgrading your TFM. But if you don't set any analysis level, then it's defaulted based on your TFM. So for example, if you target net 5, then we assume the value is 5. If you target net core app or older, then it's basically 4, right? And so this way we can add new warnings to the compiler. We can add new warnings in by adding custom analyzers. And this way you basically have symmetry still between what you're building locally and when you build on a machine with a newer SDK, right? We don't just want to magically inject these analyzers without you changing something in the project file, because otherwise people are confused with it. But locally they get 3 warnings. They build on the CI machine, suddenly they get 200 warnings, and it's like, well, what? Nothing has changed. And so by basically saying, yeah, it's tied to the TFM, or you explicitly opt into a higher level, it's part of the project file of what you're getting effectively. And so we have a bunch of those built in. There's an interesting demos here, thing that he has down the road. For example, this was one of those things that we originally did in Roslyn, but then we had to back it out because people didn't like that we added new warnings. But basically, a very common bug people have in code is that at some point they had a class and they changed to a value type, and then they have comparisons to null, and there will always be false, right? If you compare value type to null, that's never going to fly. So it's kind of nice to see that you get these more advanced, I guess this is not super advanced here, but like we have other things that are a bit more advanced, like, for example, don't lock on those things, right? But basically, we find bugs in your code without you having to run the code, right? That's kind of the spirit of those things.
Well, and I think what's really nice about this is like this gives us a really, really good dial to be able to put in some, I guess, like domain-specific analysis for parts of .NET APIs. Especially some APIs that have been around for a while that can sometimes be a little bit tricky. And like ideally, of course, like any new API is perfectly designed and, there's no way that you could ever misuse it. But like the reality is that like, there are ways that you can misuse stuff. And so we can sort of, we can't just like change those APIs, because that would break everything. But, we can add in things like this and then give people a dial to basically say like, how much they want to be warned with that. I think we call it warning waves internally. Basically, you sort of say like, okay, how strict do I want the compiler to be here? And it's, we kind of have like a sensible default for .NET 5 versus .NET Core 3.1 and .NET Framework as well. So that like, if you weren't getting all of these warnings before, then you won't get a whole bunch of new warnings unless you explicitly opt in. But for new stuff, we're going to continually opt in with more of these kinds of analysis. So more of these kinds of diagnostics triggering, which I think is great. Like I think that so far it seems like a lot of the feedback, at least on the blog post, has been pretty positive about this.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, it cuts both ways, right? I mean, like one of the problems is that we take compat very seriously, right? To a point where sometimes it's very painful, where we can't do the right thing because the wrong thing has been shipped. The problem, I think, in practice will be that, finding the dial where the middle ground is. But I think we all convince ourselves that, I guess, adding more warnings over time is fine, because we have to, I guess, appreciate that our understanding of the code and the APIs grows well beyond when we ship those, right? And I feel like there's also this overarching thing that we also try in the BCL, where we try to make more scenarios possible, and sometimes these more advanced scenarios come with trade-offs, right? So a good here is our JSON APIs. We designed the APIs to be super low overhead, meaning they don't allocate any memory when you just read a JSON document. And if you basically try to implement zero allocation APIs, it's actually quite hard to do that in a way where the resulting API is super usable. And so we did some trade-offs where we said, okay, we make the API more usable at the expense of perf. Then there were cases where we made the API slower because we wanted to say, if you misuse the API accidentally, we don't want memory leaks, so we don't want security issues because you write to the wrong buffer, for example. And so some of these things we could mitigate by saying, okay, we don't do that, but instead we basically ship an analyzer that flags incorrect usage with an error, so we can effectively say like, you can't misuse the API, or at least a particular thing you want to optimize for, you can't do incorrectly. And then we can live with some things where, yeah, it's some people might actually write a notepad and never run the analyzers, but like since the analyzers are part of the build process, you will eventually run them when you compile, right? And so the idea would be pretty much everybody runs the analyzers eventually. And so we are okay with saying, yep, this API is a bit harder to use, but it's a high performance API and you can't really misuse it.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting direction for us, because so far the way we worked is we throw the APIs, right? And then that's it, right? And then the Roslyn team added a bunch of analyzers for the language, but we didn't really do anything for specific APIs. And I think moving forward, we will change to a world where my team, when they are building APIs, we also think of analyzers and code fixers at the same time. We think of this as, one feature package rather than, 3 different parties are thinking about the APIs eventually, right? And so I think that's an interesting direction where most of our stuff is a bit more toolable than it used to be.
Yeah. I think one of the things about this and the whole warning ways idea is that one size doesn't fit all. And, projects, even with one organization and one programmer for the same projects, it's not one size fits all. Do you want to go back to the code for just a second? Because there's one other thing I just want to point out, which is, never mind. It's not the code that had the number in it. So at any rate, each of these, there it is. So each of these warnings also has a number. And so you also, in addition to collecting the warning wave, you can then opt out of individual warnings. So I do think overall, an investment in at least your active projects in having the right set of things enabled is worthwhile. So if you can meet the warnings that we all give you, great, fantastic. If some of those really worry you, then you can kick them up to an error. So you absolutely can't compile with it. And then if some of them are things, it's like, you know what, I really don't even want to worry about that, then you can set it down to information or totally turn it off. And it is an investment in that, but I really believe that that gets your code into the place that you want your code to be for that project. And so I'm super happy that we finally have, I think we have the dials right. So we have this, this big dial of the warnings that come with the system and that we try not to make changes to unless we're really compelled, because some people do have, treat warnings as errors. That means it's a break. So we're really careful about that in C#. And then we have the analyzers, and now you can warning waves, which is a set of analyzers, and then you can turn things on and off individually. So I think we kind of have the right dials, like a, you're in the ballpark, and then, the big dial, and then the little tiny dial for each one. So I'm pretty happy about that. I wish we could figure out how to do it for MSBuild, but I think we're pretty on track for Visual Studio and things. We missed 2 comments in the questions. If we want to go back and grab those now, if we want to move on.
So which comments are you referring to?
This one, let's see if I can show that. Okay.
So when you say, so that's an interesting one. So basically the idea here is there is no such thing as a non-existing version. So when you're building, we will determine the version number. Basically the idea is that the minimum, or that the version number is defaulted based on, basically net 5 will have a default, right? And then net 6 may have a different default for if you don't say the Windows version number. But if you look at net 5-Windows, no matter which version of the SDK you have, it's always going to be the exact same version number. And for net 5, that version number, I believe, is 7.0. So that means if you don't say the version number, it's the same thing as saying 7.0. It's possible that in .NET 6, for example, we default to some Windows 10 version number, for example, right? In which case, that's what it means when you don't say it. Now, it's not the minimum version number, though. So basically, what this version number here means is what API level of the operating system do you have access to. So meaning, I can say net 5-Windows 10 point blah to get access to UWP APIs, but that doesn't mean that I can only run on Windows 10 or higher. It just means during compilation, I have access to the Windows 10 APIs. You can still run on lower versions of the operating system if you are guarding your API calls. And so the minimum version number is a separate property. I think we just decided yesterday to rename that. I think now it's a supported OS version. I believe this is supported OS platform version. I think is the name of the property, and that determines what you're basically saying. This I want to run on that version or higher, right? And so that means the minimum version number might be much lower than what you're targeting. So the targeting version is always the API level you have access to, and then the minimum version number is something that is either the same or lower, right? And then everything that is between this number and the targeting number is the thing you have to guard for. That's basically the idea.
All right. Well, there's a related question here, right here.
does the new combined TFM obsolete the runtime identifier like Win7 or Win7-x86? No. So there's two concepts that we have in .NET land. One of them is basically what you're compiling against, and then the other one is what you're running against. And so the way this is modeled in NuGet land is that there's different folders. There's a ref folder, there's a lib, then there's a runtime folder, and then there's a lib folder. And the lib folder basically unifies runtime and reference folder. So you only have one folder effectively. And the lib folder is what most library authors do because they give you the exact same API that you compile for, and the same, basically the same assembly contains the implementation you're running against. For .NET, that's not always the case, right? For the platform, for example, we very often have to say, well, we give you one API set, and that's in some sort of reference assembly, and then there's an implementation assembly, but the implementation assembly might also reference some native code, and the native code has to be compiled for, of course, particular operating systems and particular bitness, and we have to express that somehow. And that's what the runtime identifiers are. So when you go into the runtime folder, there's always a subfolder per what we call RID, right, runtime identifier, and that one will still exist. And the RID mechanism is very powerful. It allows you to express almost arbitrary things. So, for example, we have support for architecture, we have support for operating system, we have support for, I think we at some point had support for AOT versus non-AOT as well. And that's not what the TFMs are for. The TFMs are mostly for modeling what you can reference. And that means the only thing we model here is effectively the .NET platform version and the operating system. But we don't have, for example, a TFM that would give you different API surface based on x86 versus x64. We don't do that. And that is a conscious choice because runtime identifiers are very powerful, but they're also very complicated. And most people don't need all that power. And so we want to have a system that is understandable and still flexible enough, and so that's what we built, if that makes sense.
All right. So I don't know if we've got more questions on those. I've got one in here on standard. So hang on just a second. Let me find it again.
Yeah, while you're finding this, I think the person that asked earlier about the platform support, I think based on the comments, he was apparently more asking whether it was easier or harder for us to add platforms now. And I would say it's not much easier than before. It's still a lot of work if you want to bring up a new architecture. And it's easier in the sense that it's open source, so we have more people that we can work with. But you still have to change the JIT. You still have to actually implement the opcodes, right? So it's still a lot of work. There's no free lunch in that space.
So there's a couple things here I want to get from the questions. First, SQL Server reporting services. I'm sorry, we're not in the middle of that. I get that that's a problem, okay? And I really, it's like, it feels like such a cop-out when we say it in this context, but it is true that we are part of a larger ecosystem, and I really hope somebody can do such a good job on that, the way SQL Server reporting services and some of the other reporting things have been. And I'm just
I would say though, I think I've heard questions in this space now for so many times. You should probably just follow up and just hunt it down, because I mean, so many people ask for this, so we should at least have the answer for this.
I don't know what the best reporting state is. The other one, you might write, it's for you again, is let's talk about .NET Standard 2.x or 3.x or whatever. Let's talk about the future of .NET Standard. I know your favorite time.
So yes. So basically, the way to think about this is that there's not going to be a new version of .NET Standard. So 2.1 is the last version of .NET Standard, effectively. And then .NET 5 is basically the successor of that, right? Because .NET 5 unifies .NET Core App and .NET Standard. And so that moving forward, you will target .NET 5, .NET 6, .NET 7. Now, as it is with the standard, you generally don't target the latest version, right? Because you want to run in more places. And so that's the same argument here. Even though there is not a new version of the standard, that doesn't mean you immediately drop the standard and you immediately move to .NET 5, because presumably you still want to run in the same places you run today. Like if you have a .NET Standard 2.0 library that people can consume from .NET Framework, then if you retarget to .NET 5, then .NET Framework can no longer reference that, right? And the same reason why you wouldn't upgrade from 2.0 to 2.1, because 2.1 also doesn't support .NET Framework. So the general idea of the standard is you want to target a version that is, basically high enough so you can get your job done, have access to the right APIs, but also old enough that you have, the market share that you can actually reach with your library, right? The thing with .NET 5 is we are fully backwards compatible, right? So like there's absolutely zero reason why you should upgrade from Net Standard 2 or 2.1 to Net 5. Yeah, you get more APIs with Net 5, of course. And so if you want that, then that's the right thing to do. But Net 5 can consume Net Standard 2.0 and 2.1 just fine. And there really isn't any benefit to be had from just upgrading from 2.0 to 5 if your code perfectly compiles fine with .NET 5. The only exception from that is if you want to use nullable reference types, because Net Standard has no annotations at all. Net Core App 3 has some, but not a lot. And with .NET 5, we have pretty much annotated the entire BCL. So we have I want to say 94% or something annotated. But I wouldn't necessarily retarget for that. What I would probably do is, if I were a library author, is I would multi-target for Net Standard 2 and Net 5 so that my code compiles for Net 5. So that's how I get my, the confidence that my nullable annotations are correct, because I check them with the ones that ship with Net 5. And then I would only ship the Net Standard 2.0 version. That's probably what I would do. But in terms of whether you target Net Standard or Net 5, from a consuming standpoint, is irrelevant. It's literally just the higher version of the same thing.
All right. We got a question here about small breaks, and I'm pulling up this. Inferring types from constraints that we, this is hard because C#. One of the things about C# is that it's a really strong backwards compatibility story. So I'm going to say the answer is most likely no. Unfortunately, that warning waves do not give us free rein to do that. We designed them around kind of an optional, this is an opt-in kind of thing. And if we were to start making breaking changes, it would probably not fit very well with that. So our expectation is that we will, current expectation is this does not open the gates for C# to do breaking changes. And I know that there's some things that both the team and individuals would just really love if we could work on. And I think that the answer is probably going to be, unfortunately, that's not what this is that's not what warning waves is aimed for. If we're ever able to do that, it'd be a different feature. And we're certainly thinking about how to manage changes around MSBuild, where every time we move, we seem to break somebody. And so we certainly think about that problem, but right now in C#, it's not high on there. The other thing we've got in here is do analyzers work cross-language? And most of them do. So that's the goal. I don't know about F#. Philip could speak to that, but they're Roslyn based, and so the Roslyn based ones pretty much just pick up C# and VB at the same time. Years ago, they designed iOperation in order to have most things work in a way that would just apply to both languages. So we're pretty okay on that. It's one of the ways that VB just gets better all the time, and VB being embedded in the different teams. So the team that does the analyzers and does the tooling for .NET in Visual Studio thinks about VB and thinks about their best experience for VB. And then the languages, and then we have WinForms and spread out like that. We get the best attention every place. So yeah, most of them do, not all of them. Some of them aren't appropriate. Every once in a while I'll veto one going, that's not the way VB programmers work. Don't do that one. But pretty much, yeah, don't do that. I mean, yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. So yeah, because there's things are different. Like whether the import should appear in the project file. The people that are into this extremely minimalistic project file don't want to see that. I'm like, Visual Basic programmers aren't so minimalistic. They're a little bit more like, tell me what's going on. And so anyway, that's that. And will VB get new updates in future frameworks as well as C#? So I want to really clarify this difference because it's really confused people. Okay, we have no current plans for language changes. So that means that we're not going to get nullable, because nullable will break everybody, and we don't think that's what's good for VB programmers right now. And it's not a consistent. There's no way we see right now to make it consistent with VB and make it feel like part of VB. So language changes like that, they are not on the agenda. Better Visual Studio behavior, WinForms, coming up to speed, WPF, places that we support. The places where the underlying platform can be supported, unfortunately, we don't have plans for ASP.NET right now. We can do Web API. We can do it fairly well, and we may even have some improvements there, like trying to get templates, which are harder than you think it is, to get those there, but we're not going to have a Razor engine, and that does cut out some of the scenarios, and that's unfortunate, but that's where we stand. And I do want to give you guys the most honest information I possibly can about Visual Basic, because I think that it's the right place for a lot of people to be, but I don't want people to either move away from VB because they're scared for the wrong reasons, or be on VB with hopes that we probably can't realize or don't plan to realize. So I do like answering those questions.
And so I wanted to add one thing on the
Yeah.
on the cross-language thing. So the analyzers themselves are, in the Roslyn world, agnostic with respect to C# versus VB. It's more around when you do fixers where you actually have to deal with the language syntax a little bit more. And on the BCL side, yes, we try to make every analyzer have a fixer if that makes sense. But I think this release, we did not do a great job with that. I think there's still a bunch of fixes we need to add. But yes, the idea there is that we generally test all the analyzers for both languages. And Roslyn does a good job of abstracting that. For the fixes, it's a little bit more work, but also not much more because, VB and C# are very similar. As Philip was heavily shaking his head earlier, we don't support F# because F# is not on the Roslyn ioperation API. So currently we don't support F# with the analyzers. I think it's something that everybody would like to see. It's just non-trivial engineering work to have a model that unifies them at that level.
Yeah.
But it's certainly something that we would be interested in. There was one more question I saw earlier.
So there's been a couple. We've got a question about recompiling MVC Core 3.1 for 5.
Yeah, that was the one. Yeah, so
who knows?
So the thing is, so there's also something that confuses people because when we talk about break and changes, people seem to be under the impression that we have a single break and change policy for the entire product.
Yeah.
We do not. So we have different bars for different areas. So like I recently explained this to a person in Windows because they were asking the same question. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, right? Like if you have different layers of the stack, you have more or less ability to make breaking changes. So for example, the runtime ironically has more abilities to do breaking changes because in the runtime, a lot of the stuff is behavior, and behavior you can very often configure, and also the GC can make a lot more changes that are more or less transparent to the code because you're not really depending on the exact order in which the GC operates. Versus, when it comes to the languages, for example, well, we really don't make breaking changes there. Like we don't change the way C# does things and silently change how your code generates, right? Because that is really hard to reason about, and nobody likes the idea of breaking changes in the language. The BCL is very similar because the BCL is not a language, but it kind of is a language for the library ecosystem because that's the types you're using in your signatures. It's the things you're expressing yourself in. And so yes, the BCL also has a very similar break and change bar to the languages themselves. So we generally don't do API breaking changes there either. We will make behavior breaking changes if we think that's in the best interest of everybody. But then very often we will at least give you a compat switch to bring back the old behavior, or we stage it out over a few releases so that people can absorb the change. But the bar is usually very high. Now, as you go up the stack, WinForms, WPF, ASP.NET, application models are a little bit easier to reason about because there really isn't usually a huge library ecosystem that you would break by making changes there. So, and in ASP.NET's case, for example, because they're web technology, web is moving fast, right? And so you can't, like, if you're super conservative, then you kind of miss the mark, right? And you basically built the technology too late, and then nobody cares about it, right? And so they sometimes have to make decisions that are, what's the best for the web stack, and sometimes the answer is, okay, we make a breaking change, right? And so that's why when you port web parts, you probably have to do a little bit more work there, versus if you port the BCL, usually you have to do nothing. It just recompiles just fine. And so that's why when somebody asks, like, what's your bar? It's like, well, the answer depends. This particular question here, I don't know the answer to, but if I had to venture a guess, I would assume there's some changes. I mean, that's pretty much the history that they always had.
They're slowing down a lot. So,
yeah.
Look back in time, it was just like, oh my gosh, those changes. Not so much. And we're going to be closing up here really soon, but I do want to comment on two more questions that we've got. First of all, the runtime. This is like runtime analyzer specifically. So one thing that's not obvious if you're don't work at Microsoft is we have two schedules. We have a schedule for the .NET Core SDK and a schedule for the .NET Core Runtime. And the .NET Core SDK updates every quarter, which is why it has goofy numbers. And the .NET Core Runtime updates once a year. So I can't tell you what his schedule is on analyzers and code fixes for the runtime because they ship in the SDK, which means he could put them out, but he may want to wait. So, what are you going to do with analyzers that somebody may be interested in contributing post .NET 5?
Same as with the rest. I mean, like so the one thing is like based on the GitHub discussions, you may have seen this already. People ask for like, okay, when should we, can I still contribute this feature? The answer usually is no. So .NET 5 is slowing down significantly. So everything you do right now is going into the master branch or main branch, depending on the repo we're in. And those are no longer merged into the release branches. So now everything that goes into the release is in a separate branch. And we cherry pick, based on various aspects. But new features generally going into .NET 6 now. You can contribute analyzers like everything else. I mean, they're in the .NET/rules and analyzers repo. We have a good ton of them. We also have a bunch of issues in the runtime repo where we said, okay, here, we tag them with code analyzers and code fixers. So you can find them if you want to contribute them. But at this point, basically nothing goes into .NET 5 anymore. So everything is going to what 6.
All right. So we have somebody asking about .NET 6. We can't open that except to say that, we've already announced that that's what we pushed Xamarin into. Not because, and I say that, not because we can't talk about it, but because A, we don't know yet. We're still trying to finish 5. And B, because we're out of time. We're out of time. We need to stick to our schedule today. And Philip's already left because he wanted a minute to prep the next meeting we're in. I know he goes first, so I can wait just a minute. So, but I am gonna have to run because I don't want to be rude to my next meeting. We're scheduled just back to back on two like. We are late to certain types of meetings, and certain types of meetings we don't go late to. So I'm gonna run. But Emo, it's been fun. Are you gonna say goodbye too, or are you gonna talk to people a little longer?
No, I'm wrapping up now as well. Like the only thing I would say is like for .NET 6, we do have already posted some issues with like things you want to do, and we probably will publish a roadmap. So you will get more details. But as Kathleen said, we're still planning it. Like there's still documents being passed around, so it will happen. All right, so I think this is it for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and then I see you, I think, in 3 weeks, I would say. All right, bye-bye.